Welcome to MIMC Africa. The 20th century is where colonization and the fight for black freedom was at its prime. From the civil rights movement in America to the fight for colonial liberation here in Africa, we all faced a similar struggle. Due to colonization, most African countries began to drift from its traditional ancestral forms of literature such as music, dance or oral tradition to more European art forms such as written prose, poetry and plays to combat and spread the message of the injustices of colonialism. A lot of memorable works emerged from the continent that addressed the main issues that told the story of the colonized on our behalf, regardless of nation. As these books are studied in countless universities across the world, it is important to look at least 10 of them we think had the greatest impact in African literature history and the way we see the world today. So, today in this new MIMC special edition, we will be counting down our pick of the 10 greatest and most influential works of African literature in the 20th century. Number 10. Houseboy. Because of the grilling effect of colonization, over time most Europeans began to appear as these perfect, superior demigods with flawless values, morals, behavior, and people who smelled of roses and worshipped this picture-perfect, glowing, shining unicorn religion called Christianity. Now with Houseboy by Ferdinand Oyono, published in 1956. This is one book that was written to challenge this apparent perfect European image of perfection. Houseboy follows a house slave called Toundi who is naive enough to think he will ever be accepted as one of them. However, he witnesses firsthand that his French caretakers are very morally corrupt, even more corrupt than he considers himself to be. What's particularly upsetting about this book is that Toundi becomes the scapegoat of all this immorality at the end of the day. He becomes the scapegoat for all their corrupted sins, even losing his life because of it. The book is subtle yet firm as it exposes the hypocrisy of colonization while also shedding light on the degrading treatment Native Africans had to face under the occupation of Europeans, a treatment that was even worse than the way they treated dogs apparently. So with that said, please read this book, and I suggest you read it with a grain of salt, because if you get too much into the detail, you may really never like white people ever again. Number 9. The House of Hunger. This book is widely celebrated in Zimbabwe, probably the most famous pieces of literature to come out of the country. Dambudzo Marechera is a legendary writer, but I also believe the way the guy lived his life has a great contribution to his popularity. The guy was notorious for being a court troublemaker who was kicked out of school about 3 times because he would start fights in bars, drink until he lost consciousness, and literally leave the house on fire. Like, quite literally, yes. He did try to set the Oxford University building on fire once, which led to his final expulsion in his life. I know, right? I tried to talk him out of it, but he just couldn't listen. And the House of Hunger is just a recollection of all that chaos in one sitting. Of course, he changed a few names, mixed a few locations, and added a truckload of vulgar words and explicit scenes you will probably never forget as soon as you read them off that page. Yes, that is the House of Hunger. But even in the midst of all that mayhem, the book still has a powerful take on racism, white brutality, and black corruption, of whether it all means something or it's just part of the nihilistic process of existence we can never really explain or control. For more on this book, I recommend you watch another special documentary we made on Dambudzo Marechera and the book in question. Number 8. Black Skin, White Masks. This book is sort of an African equivalent to American scholar W.E.B. Du Bois' 1903 magnum opus, The Soul of Black Folk, a psychoanalytical book influenced by the Austrian psychology godfather Sigmund Freud himself, that explained clearly the psychological impact of colonization in the minds of the colonized. It's argued due to the gruesome treatment Africans and black people faced on their own lands go through due to colonization, slavery, and racism, they started to feel like their natural selves was not good enough. Therefore, a long-lasting seed of an inferiority complex was planted in the minds of most black people that lasted from generation to generation. An inferiority complex that still manifests itself in various ways even today, which makes the book relevant even today in modern social media times.
Professor Davids warns that skin lightening can even become addictive, and that it will take time for black cultural movements to change ideas about what it means to be beautiful.
It developed as a self-hatred and blind love for a foreign culture they barely understood. This is what is deemed as the identity crisis, which is quite a prolific theme in many African novels of the 20th century, such as Houseboy, Waiting for the Rain, Mission to Color, and Devil on the Cross by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Number 7, A Grain of Wheat. Written in 1957 and based on the Kenyan Mau Mau uprising from 1952 to 1956 and the independence celebration known as Uhuru, which is Swahili meaning freedom, that followed. This is Ngugi's more famous and critically acclaimed books. Even former United States President Barack Obama has publicly acclaimed and endorsed this book. The book also happens to be highly personal too to Ngugi. With his family being directly affected by the war as a child, his older brother had joined the movement, his stepbrother was killed, and his mother was arrested and tortured. A Grain of Wheat allegorically reflects the betrayal and anxiety that came with independence and immediate post-independence, and with betrayal, existential solitude involving everyone, the consequence of frustrated aspirations to the communion of the others. Through a depressed man called Mugo, a man torn with guilt for betraying a fellow beloved war hero known as Kihika, it both directly and indirectly interrogated the authenticity of freedom and what it truly means. A Grain of Wheat uses elements of cultural nationalism as well as Fanonist Marxism in its storyline to explore if independence is truly this utopian heaven-like society where everything just goes so well and so perfectly because racism is no longer a factor. What do you think about this? Number 6, The Joys of Motherhood. Joys of Motherhood is obviously a book that was given its name in irony by Buchi Emecheta, an ironic reference to the hardships women face in marriage and more precisely motherhood. It would really be fun if they named it The Horrors of Motherhood, right? Yeah, you have to be a little more artsy and sophisticated than that. It follows New Ego and her endless struggle of shooting babies for a society that forces her to do so and still does not appreciate her anyway at the end of the day when she does. Because of her painful past with domestic abuse, Nigerian Buchi Emecheta evolved into a very defiant woman who told it like it is in her literal work. Other literal works like The Bride Price or Second Class Citizen, and this book is also a shining example. The book is lauded for its unapologetic take on all quote joys of motherhood, like women being treated like trash when you do have babies and being treated slightly less like trash when you do.
Women are, regarded slightly a little better than goats or something, but
Than what? Than goats?
Than goats and animals, just slightly above that. She's a property to be owned.
It is listed as one of the greatest books published in Britain, as in many publications. As the main protagonist, never finds the happiness she was looking for when you look at her life at the end of the day. When it comes to having the happiness she chased via marriage or motherhood, she basically was chasing pavements like Adele. Aww. Number 5, The Lion and the Jewel. This is probably one of the most famous plays in African history, if not the most famous. From Nigeria and written by Professor, the first Black Nobel Prize African author, Wole Soyinka, who also happens to have an amazing afro. I really just had to give a shout out to that. The Lion and the Jewel is a very funny play that satirized the Western culture and its influence on Nigeria. Unlike its contemporaries that were often filled with bitterness, anger, and resentment, such as Who Killed the Mangy Dog or Houseboy, the play has a much more playful and light-hearted approach towards colonization, kind of like Mission to Color by Mongo Betty. But equally as hard-hitting in its critical examination, it used significant character devices in Lankukle, the westernized teacher who represents Western progress, and Baroka, the lion who represents old pre-colonial traditional ways of Africa. The fight in the play was not literal, of course, although it would have been possible, because there was a lot of tension between Lakunle and Baroka when you see the play. A lot of tension and competition, mainly over the heart of the village jewel named Sidi, a beautiful but kinda self-indulgent woman.
My name is Sidi and I am beautiful. The stranger took my beauty and placed it in my hands. Here it is. Not this city, whose fame has spread to Lagos and far beyond. Because you can already hear the ballad makers and their songs in praise of City, the incomparable.
Woman who probably represents the African future itself, minus the arrogant self-indulgence. Number 4, So Long a Letter, C'est un long lettre by Madame Mariama Bell, is a book very similar to American author Alice Walker's classic The Color Purple, in the sense that it is written in letter form, which makes it an epistolary novel and puts the agony and distress women go through at the hands of their husbands, culture, society in general. The letter is written by an aging Senegalese woman called Ramatu Lai to her friend Aissatou while she is mourning her husband called Modu. She is mourning, but not necessarily because she is genuinely grieving her husband, but because the Islamic tradition has forced her to do so, and many other grave injustices she has to go through because of culture. The letter Ramatu Lai then writes indirectly exposes the grave injustices she and other women have to face in the face of Islamic tradition that justifies polygamy and women as money-making machines that can be exploited for personal gain. So Long a Letter explores the double standards of marriage, and although it mainly focuses on attacking Islamic culture precisely, the story it told was one story that could be related to so many other cultures around the world that oppress women because of their standards that really don't cater to their needs. Cultures that have patriarchal standards that marginalize women and their feelings. Number 3, The Wretched of the Earth. Like Alia Tupac Shakur or Christopher Okibo, the poet from Nigeria, Frantz Fanon was one of those artists who died too young in his prime, and because of this, his name will forever be immortalized in world literature. This Martinesian monsieur was sharp as he was prophetic. He wrote The Wretched of the Earth, a not so pretty post-colonial forecast of what would happen in the future when African nations got their initial taste of self-governance. In a time when most African nations like Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, Kenya were having their first taste of freedom, full of faith and hope and tears of joy. It took a lot of courage for him to come forth with his wretched theories about the wretched black government after independence. Wretched theories about how we will probably see more of the same, if not worse, of the oppressive, sadistic iron rule our grandfathers had to endure long before we came along. I wish this apparent cynicism of this book of the 60s didn't come to pass, but this cynicism definitely did come to pass, and the proof is definitely in the chocolate pudding. When you look at countries like Cameroon with Paul Biya or Uganda with Yoweri Museveni,
April, when President Pierre Nkurunziza announced he was seeking a third term, something the opposition says violated the constitution and a peace deal that ended an ethnically charged civil war in 2005. Protests in April and June left dozens dead and prompted tens of thousands of people to flee the country.
Yes, here we are. It's the African independence, the wretched of the earth, preached about a society full of poverty, violence, and not to mention corruption, black looting, and majority suffering. Number 2, Decolonizing the Mind. Written by legendary writer and scholar Ngugi wa Thiong'o, this book focuses more on the languages and their importance in preserving our African identity. The importance of our native African languages that had been sidelined by European missionary schools, and up to this point in 1986 when it was published, we cannot really say most scholars, even black ones, really cared about the modes of communication we use and thought just the use of European languages as normal or even dignified. However, Ngugi wrote one hell of an excellent argument in the essay that language is not just a mode of communication but an actual integral part of conserving the history and the way of life of any culture in particular. That is why Ngugi believes colonization to truly prevail in any setting, the colonizer must completely impose their language upon the colonized.
Language is so basic to any community. And what I found is this, very interesting, that wherever one people have colonized another, they always impose their language. Whether the French, the Portuguese, anywhere.
This sparkled the famous African language debate of whether European languages should continue to be taught in schools or not. For greater detail in this topic, I recommend you watch the special MIMC edition that explores the conflict of the language debate we did in the past. Number 1, things fall apart. If you have ever used the internet in your life, this is kind of an obvious one, isn't it? Things Fall Apart is that one book European snobs run to when they want to give off the impression that they know African literature. I mean, they be like, of course I know African literature. I read Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe and Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. But really, it is a great book though. Things Fall Apart follows the mental issues of his now famous main character, Okonkwo, a man whose fierce obsessive pursuit of masculinity causes him to run into countless tragedies in his life. Not only does this book have an interesting premise, what truly made this book an unforgettable cultural groundbreaker was the context of the time it was written back in 1958. It laid the foundation for other great African literary works that came after it. Before it was published, Igbo and the rest of African cultures were really regarded as stone-worshipping religions that also happened to be demonic according to the colonizers. But its traditional technical qualities fleshed out African culture as a complex system of laws and rules that are equally worth appreciating as the Western cultures. Nigerian Chinua Achebe was praised for his incorporation of African metaphors, words, proverbs, folktales, idioms, and folklore to tell a much more authentic African story that explored Africans rightfully as not animals or savages without any feelings, of course as written in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, but as humans with flesh and blood and sophisticated emotional issues just like everyone else who draws breath on this earth. Through its main character Okonkwo, who is hugely flawed, who is heavily flawed as his emotional issues were put on display, but also explained them in such a humanly relatable way, it was hard not to empathize. So, those are the books that shaped the world of African literature to what it is today. Yes, most of these books examine colonization, something that African literature has often been criticized for being too political, but you understand where these authors were coming from, since these were hard-hitting issues that were just too hard to ignore. As with black literature in the United States, many of these books came as a form of political protest to racial injustice and a push for freedom. Not to say you should stay in the past or continue to be bitter about what happened, but it's always good to know the past struggles and where we came from. These are our classic works that will probably be forever influential in African education, politics, culture, media, economics, and society in general because of their brilliant portrayal of sensitive socio-political issues that are influential even today. We will study these books here on MIMSI Africa and many more in broader context in the future. So, if you have a book you already read on this list, tell me what you thought about it, and if you have a book you think we left out, cause truth be told, we probably did leave it out. African literature is just too broad, hey? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. And as always, guys, thanks for watching MIMSI Africa. Hi guys, thanks for watching the video. And as always, I hope you got enlightened. You know, here at MIMSI Africa, we also offer graphic designing and video editing services to anyone around the world through Remit. The prices are quite reasonable, of course. So if you have a YouTube channel, video, blog, or social media business that may require quality visuals that really make a statement and really engage your audience, hit us up either here in the comment section or at our Instagram inbox, and we can make arrangements there. The link is in the bio. And as always, folks, thanks for watching MIMSI Africa.